Hello, everybody. Welcome to Public Speaking Communication 3. And today we're going to be talking about your delivery chapter. So, the chapter on delivery. And so, what happens is in class, it would be broken down into 2 different days. But today I will cover it all in its completion. And you can kind of break it down into 2 days if you want to, if the lecture is too long. But I'll be short and quick and to the point while still explaining the points, I think, in sufficient enough detail. So, the way that you could see this is I'm going to be moving through the slides, and you're going to see the slides on the major screen, and then in the top right upper corner, you're going to see me speaking and presenting. And so you kind of get to see me speaking, and then I'm gonna be sharing my screen with you. So let's get down to business, and let's talk a little bit about delivery. So delivery, this chapter primarily focuses on how well you are able to connect with your audience, how well you're able to engage and interact with the audience that you have. So the three main ideas that we're going to be covering is, one is how you say something is just as important as what you say. Good speakers choose the right mode of delivery, and good speakers effectively use verbals and nonverbals. And we're going to break that down in detail as we dig in. Now, the picture that I want you to notice, this is from a movie called The Wolf of Wall Street. It's based on the true life story of an individual named Jordan Belfort. And this individual made a lot of money by being able to inspire others to sell. And he was a really, really effective salesperson. And he continues to do so. Unfortunately, he went the more shady route and did some illegal things. And as a result of that, got in trouble. If you ever want to see the whole story, I mean, let me give you the heads up. There's a lot of language in that movie, as well as sexuality and content like that. So be aware of the content of the movie. But The Wolf of Wall Street is definitely an interesting watch if you choose to watch it yourself. So let's get down to business. The sample speech, I'll post a link for you for a sample speech of an individual doing a presentation. And in class, we would have talked about what went well and what went not so well in that presentation. So let's start off with reading from a manuscript. Now you see I have a picture of Deadpool, who is my favorite superhero, and he's reading from a manuscript. Now there's some pros. There's some good things about reading from a manuscript. The pro is that it's good on formal occasions. So for example, if you have the president doing the State of the Union, what happens is that he needs to be very precise in what he says. He needs to be very specific and very detailed in what he is communicating. And so because of that, he is going to be reading from a manuscript. Now, the downside of reading from a manuscript is that it can end up sounding a little bit monotone. There could be no eye contact, and it could be not as engaging. So what you want to do is, as a speaker, be very well aware of, do you need to have a very precise message, or do you need to have more an engaging message and a less precise message? If you have to watch every word carefully, if somebody's, like, we're talking about the coronavirus, and Trump has gotten a little bit criticized by how he talked about it, right? So if you're talking about something that's going to affect a lot of people, and that's some people are fearful about, like the coronavirus, then you want to choose your words carefully and maybe speak from a very, very detailed and prepared outline. In our class, you're not going to be speaking about something um, that is like a public service announcement going out to millions of people. Instead, you're going to be speaking to a crowd of people, and the goal is to partially to engage the audience. And so partially it's to inform, partially it's to engage, partially it's to it later on in the semester to persuade. So what you want to do is you want to be aware of what the occasion is. Now, another thing you can do is you can memorize a manuscript. The pros of memorizing the manuscript is that there's eye contact, and it works if you are skilled at delivery and is good for precise messages. Now, the downside is that it can be really hard, it can sound fake, and it can be easy to be thrown off. Now, I don't recommend for you to memorize your presentation, because what happens is that if for some reason you forget one part or one section of your manuscript presentation, you might be completely thrown off. Your whole presentation might be derailed, and you might forget the order of the other things that you're saying, and it may make you feel very, very nervous and anxious. Now, one good example is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs started off by, speaking and presenting, and he wasn't very good. If you look at some of his initial keynote presentations, they weren't all that good. But then as time went on, he started memorizing more and more and more of his material, and he became legendary. He became a legendary keynote speaker. And when Apple would host an event with Steve Jobs there, people would be outside the door in line, lining up to hear him talk about the new product. Obviously, they're excited about the product, but they were also excited about how the product was going to be presented. So another strategy is memorizing a manuscript. Furthermore, when we're talking about speaking from an outline, we're talking about the method that we're going to use in this class. It's the best method. It's more conversational. It allows you to choose your words flexibly, and it allows you to adapt to the situation. So you're in your outline, you're just writing down key phrases and key words, and that's how you're engaging the audience. Now, the reason I say it's the best method is because it allows you to adapt to the audience. If the audience looks confused or bored or unengaged, you can change your style and you can change your delivery in order to engage your audience in that manner. So the class does not say memorize your presentation or speak from a manuscript. Instead, in this class, we use the speaking from an outline route. Now, we can also talk a little bit about impromptu speaking. Now, impromptu speaking is when you generate speech content in the moment. It's you create a mental outline, you speak off the top of your head. I did in all my time of going to school, I did this type of speech only once, and it was one of the scariest experiences that I did. I literally just walked in front of the class and said, okay, give me a topic and I'll talk about it. And somebody threw out a topic, and I got lucky because the topic was something that I felt comfortable talking about. But then somebody else said, oh, if you picked me, I would have had you say a roast. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad that the other person wasn't chosen, because if they told me to do a roast of somebody, I would have just been completely lost. So impromptu speaking is where you speak off the top of your head, and you have a mental outline in your mind where you're like at point 1, point 2, point 3, but you don't have note cards to back you up. You don't have anything to protect you, and you make it up as you go. So this is in theater, they have improv where people make things up as they go, and it's very entertaining to watch people do it. I don't recommend for you to make an impromptu speech, especially since you are required to have some sources. Now let's talk about a few vocal delivery skills. One vocal delivery skill that we want to be aware of is volume. That's how loud or soft your voice is during a delivery. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a concert where you were close to the speakers, and then like you were deaf for 3 or 4 days after that. You just heard it ringing in your ears. That's not a very good thing to put your ears through. So as a speaker, you need to be aware of how loud you are speaking to your audience. Now, usually, for the most part, most speakers are speaking too quietly, not too loudly. But there's a few of you who speak a little bit on the louder side. So be mindful of the room size, because the way that the sound waves bounce off of the walls matters. So room size, be aware of that. Be aware of audience size, the size of the audience, as well as the equipment that is available. Do you have a microphone, et cetera, et cetera? So those kinds of things that affect volume. So make sure that you speak at a volume that is comfortable for everyone. Don't be yelling off the top of your lungs and making the front row kind of go deaf, right? So be mindful of volume. Another thing is the tone, which is the highs and lows of your voice. That's the pitch, and you want to vary pitch to add warmth and color. I don't know if it's going to pick it up on this microphone, but if I talk softer and if I talk with warmth, it's a much different perception if I speak to you like this, right? This is a much more authoritative, in your face presentation style than this kind of style. There's a difference in the tonality. So what you want to do is you want to vary your tone, and you want to change your tone. When you're saying something that's important, you might want to emphasize it and have a certain kind of tonality to what you're saying. And see how in the image it has a couple of different pictures of different instruments, a flute, a violin, a bass, and it has different sounds. So even instruments have different tonalities. So that's when it comes down to tone. Now, another thing that matters is the rate of delivery. So what you want to do is you want to be mindful of how quickly you speak. Now, if you notice the way that I speak, I tend to speak very quickly. I tend to go just like a rocket, just, and that's because I used to be a college debater, and I got used to learning how to talk very, very quickly. So the do's and don'ts, the do is you talk fast enough to make something lively and interesting, but don't speed up to fit a short timeline. So if you are preparing for your presentation, make sure that your speaking style matches the scenario and the needs of the audience. So if you speak so quickly that your words jumble together and you start to mumble, that is no good. So make sure to speak in a way that is slow enough for people to understand, but fast enough that people are engaged. People's ears are trained to listen to speech that is at a rate faster than we usually talk. So as long as you pronounce your words clearly, as long as you articulate, you're in good shape. So that's rate of delivery. Now let's talk about projection. Projection is booming your voice to reach all listeners. Now, if you look at the posture of this gentleman here, what you have is someone who has a bad posture and someone who has good posture. Now, this is all about the diaphragm. Your air gets gathered in your diaphragm and you breathe out or from your lungs in your diaphragm. And so when it comes down to it, when it comes down to projection, your voice naturally booms if you have a proper posture. So I'm sitting down a little bit, so I'm a little bit hunched over as I'm sitting down because that's more natural for me as I'm sitting. I'm not sitting here straight like this. And so my voice doesn't boom as much as it would in a classroom when I'm speaking and standing straight. And that is because of the posture of the speaker. So if you have good posture, your voice will naturally carry further. Now, one of the problems that I ran into when as I taught is that I would start to usually lose my voice by the end of the week. And so I would constantly be losing my voice, constantly losing my voice. And I'm like, that's not good. What do I need to do? And one of the things I realized is I over relied on my volume that came from my mouth, and I did not have the proper posture to let my voice boom. And when I changed the posture and I, extended my torso and extended my body and raised my chin just a little bit, what happened is that I was able to project much more effectively. Now let's talk a little bit about articulation. Now the articulation has to do with the crispness of your voice. It's expressing each syllable clearly. It's pronouncing things. Don't round off ends of words and don't lower your voice at the end of the sentence. Now, you want to say things crisply. Crisply means clean or clear. So if I'm saying something, I want to pronounce every syllable clearly. So if I'm saying syllables, I'm saying syllables. I'm pronouncing each part in a way that your ears are able to capture. So you do not want to round off the ends of words because that ends up having a negative effect on the perception of your presentation. So that's articulation. Now, another thing is pronunciation. Pronunciation is how correctly you say words. And tip, be careful with names and places. So pronunciations is tomato, tomato, avocado. How do you say those things, right? So it's the proper thing to say would be tomato, salmon or salmon, right? Do you add the L or do you not add the L, right? So people judge you and they gauge your credibility based on how well you pronounce things and how well and how clearly you say things. So if you're talking about names and places, this is very, very important, especially with people's names. One way to get people to discredit you or not pay attention to what it is that you're saying is to say their name the wrong way. You do not want to say somebody's name the wrong way. That's a big no-no. So make sure to learn the proper way to pronounce somebody's name. So that's pronunciation. Another one is pausing, leaving gaps between words or sentences. So pausing for emphasis can have a powerful effect on your presentation. So you pause, and what that does is it gives the audience this idea of, okay, now I need to pay attention clearly to what is being said, because the pause creates a sense of emphasis. It creates a sense of importance. Now, what you want to do, avoid verbal fillers, such as etc., like, so, totally, any number one of those would count as a verbal filler. I say verbal fillers when I present. Everyone says verbal fillers when they present, but make sure to lower the amount of them that you have. And when you have pauses, don't include those verbal fillers in those pauses. So as said before, when you create a pause, it can really create a sense of emphasis and a sense of importance for the content you are presenting. Now, we want to also talk a little bit about nonverbal delivery skills, a few things that have to do with your body language. Now, eye contact is a complicated one, because if you do too much eye contact, the other person may feel a little bit intimidated. And today, people are less and less comfortable with eye contact. So what you want to do is you want to look people directly in the eyes, and that keeps the audience interest. It gauges people's reactions, and it establishes trust. And so what you want to do is you want to maybe look from one eye to the other eye to the nose, or from one eye to the forehead to the other eye. If you want to do a more intimate gaze, you can look one eye to the other eye, down to the lips, back up to the eye, right? So, and then sometimes look away for just a moment, just to take away from the intensity of the interaction. So one exercise that I told you to do earlier in the semester was, and I don't know if you did it or not, but it was one of those scary ones, and that was to look somebody in the eyes for 3 minutes without saying anything. Just gaze in each other's eyes for 3 minutes and not say anything. And most people were like, "Oh, that's just too much. That's too hard. That's too complicated." And absolutely, like, most people can't pull off 3 minutes without starting to giggle or laugh or get uncomfortable and stop doing it. So eye contact is one of those things that you have to understand the importance of it, but also understand the awkwardness of it if it's done incorrectly. If you just stare. I remember when I went to the Middle East to teach English, and the eye contact there was so much more intense than when I was in the United States. And I was like, man, why are these people staring at me? This is like this is intense. Like, and it was just uncomfortable. And then I started to pick up on that eye contact. So then when I came back to the United States, my eye contact was more intense, and people were like, why is this guy staring at me? So when it comes down to eye contact, be careful, be mindful, but remember that it's a very powerful tool. The eyes are the windows, as they say, to the soul, and you can get a lot out of somebody's eyes. So pay attention to your eye contact. Another thing that you want to be mindful of is gestures, using hand movements to emphasize points in your speech. Now, gestures are very powerful tools, because what they do is they allow you to speak with your hands. And what you want to do is you want to speak with emphasis. So, for example, if you're saying a word, you can use your hand to emphasize the syllables that you're speaking. And so what happens is, by speaking with your hands, you're driving the message home much more effectively. And going back to the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, when he does his presentation and he uses hand gestures, he's just a pro at using hand gestures, and really driving the point home through his hands. So what you want to do is you want to practice to move your hands that are in such a way that they are in sync with your voice. So they are uh, complementary to what it is that you're saying. So using hand movements is very, very important. And so you want to learn to provide proper eye contact, panning the audience, looking at the whole audience, covering the whole audience, but then also using gestures in an effective way. And then there's also physical movement, using a variety of physical movement. Now, if a person is just moving back and forth and just like walking across the stage over and over and over and over again from place to place, then it could become distracting, because it may induce anxiety in your audience, or the audience may think you are anxious. So what you want to do is, when you're speaking, instead of walking back and forth, you want to walk a little bit, stop, pan the audience, so like look around at the audience, and then move again, walk, stop, pan the audience, move again. So when it comes down to physical movement, you want to move in such a way that is engaging to the audience, and that does not increase and enhance that sense of anxiety. So move strategically, stop, pause, pan, stop, pause, pan, move, stop, pause, pan, move. So you follow that format and you'll be in good shape. Another thing that helps is proxemics, and that has to do with space and distance with the audience. So that's how close you stand to your audience. So you don't want to stand too close to your audience, or you don't want to stand too far away from the audience. If you could see in this picture, there's three. There's one where he's right there in her face, and she's like, just feeling uncomfortable, and she's moving back. Then he's right up against the wall, and she's kind of leaning forward to hear him. And then here he's in the middle of the stage, and then she feels comfortable there. So what happens is that you want to be comfortable with where you're presenting from, and the distance and the space, and then you also want the audience to feel comfortable with where you're presenting from and the spacing that you have. Now, most people have a personal bubble. Like, I tend to have like a big bubble. Like, I just, like, for me, I'm like, I extend my hand and it's still not my bubble. So if anybody gets close to me, I start kind of getting feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know why, but it's just that I tend to have a bigger bubble than a lot of people. Now, some of you have very small bubbles, and you're like, you feel comfortable getting close to somebody, getting physically in somebody's face, not in an intimidating sort of way, but just get close when you're interacting. And so it depends on the person, but what you want to do is you want to watch the other person carefully to see what is their level of comfort. Do they seem comfortable with how close you are with them? Do they seem comfortable with how engaged you are with them? Do they seem comfortable with the distance and the spacing? So that has to do with proxemics. And then we also want to talk about physical appearance. And what I want you to do is I want you to notice this gentleman. He's wearing two different outfits, and it's the same guy, but one of them you would probably let examine you if you have some sort of medical health issue, and the other one you'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm not letting this guy examine me, no way. So initial impressions can happen before your speech. The first 30 seconds of people's impression of you leave a lasting impression. Like, first impressions matter, and they matter a lot, they matter quite a bit. So when it comes down to it, what you want to do is you want to engage the audience, and engage the audience with your professionalism, and make sure that you're showing up in a way that is professional. Even as I speak with a hoodie on, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit more in a relaxed mode right now. But when it comes down to physical appearance, that increases the perception of your professionalism. It increases the perception of your qualifications if you dress up, or if you dress in a certain way. So that's physical appearance, very, very important, and it definitely changes the way people perceive you. And like the president, always wearing a navy blue suit, white shirt, and red tie with a flag pin. And by the way, the flag is red, white, and blue. So it's the president usually wears a suit that represents the color of the flag. And we've talked about this before, right? Everything's very color coordinated, and there's a flag usually behind the president. And everything's there to try to enhance this perception of patriotism. So that's the idea of physical appearance, and that kind of wraps up the chapter. So what we talked about is a little bit about vocal delivery skills, non-verbal delivery skills. We talked a little bit about outlines, and what you should do. Should you use a manuscript? Should you memorize? And we talked about the best method being outlining. We talked about the voice and tonality. We talked a little bit about rate of delivery and volume and eye contact. So those are all pieces of the puzzle. And when you start putting those pieces of the puzzle together, then you're going to start to learn how to be a more effective public speaker. So that kind of wraps up our presentation. I appreciate your time. We're still learning this technology. So if there's any glitches, I'm sorry. You just let me know. Email me if you have trouble viewing anything. I'll be posting this on YouTube so that you can view it, and you don't have to show up and be live with me in these presentations, but that you can watch it at your own time. And that's that. So thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful day.